Howdy my totally tubular gamers, and we're back with another ranking video. Today we're talking Dead Island. Yeah, Dead Island, an interesting series of zombie games with a lot of ups and downs, but here we are with the release of Dead Island 2 finally after like a decade, and I thought, hey, now's a good time to talk about all the Dead Island games. I played all of them as they came out, including now Dead Island 2. Dead Island has always had an interesting history where the trailer usually ends up being better than the game. The original game had an amazing trailer. Dead Island 2 had some pretty solid trailers too, but how are the games? For the most part, Dead Island is a series of action RPGs with some survival horror elements. But there has actually been a few spin-offs that are a little different from what you'd expect from the Dead Island series, all of them put out by Deep Silver. Dead Island has had a bit of a rocky history, to say the least. It took a long time for that original game to come out, where it was met with mostly positive reception, but it was a bit mixed, I remember back in the day. We had Riptide, we had a couple interesting spin-offs, I'll say, and then we just waited like an eternity, it felt like, for Dead Island 2, but here we are. Dead Island 2 is finally out. I am honestly shocked that it actually came out. In the span of Dead Island 2 being announced to coming out, like, I've completed high school, I've completed college, I now work a full-time job, and I'm pretty far in my career, all things considered. Like, yeah, Dead Island 2, it took a very long time to come out, but here we are, and we're going to talk about all of them. We're going to talk about the whole series. I've been with Dead Island literally since day one. I was excited for the original back when I was in, like, high school, and I've been excited for Dead Island 2 if it ever was going to come out. And we're not going to be talking about Dying Light either, the other zombie game with parkour elements that may or may not be better than this series. Anyway, let's just get right to it. I'm talking all the Dead Island games. Let me know your favorite down below or some fun memory. We're going to be looking at, just kind of everything. How's the story? How's the gameplay? How's the RPG elements? How have these games aged now that they're actually getting up there in age? How are all of these games when looking at the entire series? Going to do a little review, ranking of all of them. Like, share, sub, comment, all that good stuff. You already know what's up. Anyway, let's just get right into it. What do I think is the weakest of the Dead Island games? Well, it's pretty obvious what the worst of the Dead Island series is. It's Dead Island Epidemic, the discontinued MOBA that was released initially in 2013. It was released in early access, and it eventually got into open beta in like 2015. I actually did sign up to play this, and I did get a key, and I did try it. Here's even a screenshot to show how much time I put into it. Obviously not very much. I don't really care for MOBAs. I was just like, ooh, a new Dead Island game, and didn't really try much of it beyond like an hour or two, and the game was canceled. I mean, if you played it back then, that was the only time you could have played it. It's been discontinued. You can't go online. There's nothing to do with it anymore. It totally is useless. And so, yeah, it's just kind of the worst by default. I didn't really have any thoughts of it, but it's gone now. Alright, and so here we have Dead Island Retro Revenge releasing in 2016. I'm pretty sure most people don't even know that this game exists. I actually didn't know this game existed until I was about to do this video. This is the only one I haven't played at release, and you're really not missing much with this one. So Retro Revenge, I don't really know, like, there was no marketing. It just kind of dumped onto Steam one day, and here we are. So what is it though? It's like an auto runner with like a 16-bit brawler. Like, you're automatically running forward and you just kind of punch everything that moves, and you dodge enemies, you try to have combos. It's a bit like a rhythm game actually, but it has like a little bit of Streets of Rage in it, and you just kind of beat the crap out of all the zombies and just everything in general. It really has nothing to do with Dead Island. It's about this guy trying to get his cat back. The game is a pretty in-your-face personality that, you know what, I can dig it, it's different. But the actual gameplay is really nothing special. Like, you pretty much seen everything this game has to offer in like 5 to 10 minutes. It goes on a bit longer than that, but I'll be real, this feels like a mobile game. This really feels like a mobile game. There's just not a lot going on, and I don't really care too much for these auto runners, stuff like Temple Run or Subway Surfers, and this is like a 2D version of that, is low-key what it feels like. And I don't know, I didn't really put much time into this. I was just like, I mean, why does this exist? Who is this for? Like, genuinely, who is this for? And I'm pretty sure the only reason most people have this is because if you buy Dead Island 1 and Riptide, it actually is included. So, again, the personality's alright. The graphics, I mean, it's supposed to be a throwback, so I guess it looks good in that sense. And the main character seems funny enough, but I really just don't have much to say about this one. Like, I just didn't really care for it. I was like, this is not the type of game that I think Dead Island should be, and I just don't really know what they were going with this one. You could definitely skip it. And so here we have the spin-off Escape Dead Island releasing in 2014, developed by Fat Shark. I remember right before it came out, everybody said this was going to be awful, but I, for whatever reason, just ignored them and checked it out anyway, and I gotta say, wasn't good then, and I actually tried and played through it last year, It wasn't good again. And this is a deeply flawed game. So Escape Dead Island is a, quote, survival mystery game that follows the story of Cliff, who sets sail to document the unexplained events rumored to have happened on Bonoi. He arrives there and he finds out that not everything is as it seems. Not at all. This game has just an absolutely awful story. Like, the story is hilariously terrible. It is so generic, boring, uninteresting, bland. The characters are just awful. Like, you don't like any of these characters. You don't care what happens to these characters. It's impressive how bad the characters are in this game. The writing is just as bad, and the ending is just stupid. Like, it's confusing, and there's like no resolution. I still don't get it all these years later. Like, anything to do with the plot, the characters, anything like that is just awful. It is shockingly bad that this was like released as like not a AAA product at the time, but even like a AA product. Like, this is just bad. And the gameplay, you know, it's not any better. It sucked back then, it sucks now, and it's gonna suck forever because the gameplay of this game is incredibly shallow. It is a third-person action-adventure game with some melee combat, some stealth, some gunplay. There's no RPG elements here at all. There's nothing related to RPGs, no levels, nothing. You play as Cliff the entire time. You explore around this island, and you take pictures of stuff. You find items, and you get into combat with zombies, and that's really the entire gameplay loop. You're exploring this island, just trying to pretty much find the next objective, and it's pretty linear for the most part. It's not really an open world to explore. You do a lot of backtracking in this game, like way more backtracking than you should, to the point where I'm like, were they trying to make this like a Metroidvania or something, which the game almost has some elements of, but it's just so poorly done that, no, it's not. And you get into a lot of combat. The combat is very, and I mean very basic. Like, it never evolves, it never gets more advanced than pressing the button a few times, and that's it. Like, the combat is really shallow and uninteresting. The stealth is pretty poor as well. It just doesn't really feel great, and it doesn't work all that well. Gunplay, the less said about it, the better. There's no enemy variety here. There's only like 4 enemies, and all of them are pretty annoying, and they'll just stalk you to the ends of the earth. I ended up just trying to run past most of them because I just hated the combat so much. The movement in this game feels just awful. It's incredibly sluggish no matter what you're doing. Like, I don't know what they were going for with this, but it really does feel, it just feels really bad. All of the objectives are just uninteresting. They all follow a few archetypes and never get any more serious or in-depth than go find this, go collect this, bring this back, go here. Like, that is really everything. The game has Cliff just kind of losing it at points, and it tries to be super trippy and different, and this just didn't really add anything either. It just didn't do anything, and it just made me be like, is the game over yet? For some reason, the final boss is like brutally difficult also, which I always thought was strange, but this game, like, I just don't really know who they were going for, what they were doing with this game. Fat Shark would go on to make much better games, and you know, I don't really want to talk about this game anymore. I don't like it. And here we have the original Dead Island releasing all the way back in 2011. I remember when the game came out, I was in high school, I loved the trailers, I thought the game looked awesome, I got the game at release and was like, well, it's not as great as the trailers made it out to be, but I still thought it was a pretty decent and fun game. And you know, all these years later, yeah, I still think Dead Island is still a pretty alright game. So the story is about, as the title implies, an island, and this island is full of zombies. You know, the game starts with this rap party with Howdy you voodoo bitch, and you know, all of our characters wake up the next day in their hotel, and there's just zombies everywhere, and so it's up to them to figure out what happened and just get the hell off the island. The story of Dead Island was always really simple and didn't have a lot going for it, but I kind of liked that. It didn't need anything all that complex, and they just got right to the point, and you just really got into the gameplay. Sure, the characters were corny, and the way the story progresses is incredibly cheesy and predictable, but I don't know, I just kind of liked that it was straight to the point. So the game is an open world action RPG with a heavy emphasis on melee combat. You'll be dropped into these areas that aren't usually too big at all, and you basically will just talk to some characters, get some quests, go from point A to B, collect stuff, and get into a bunch of fights with zombies. There's actually 4 different playable characters you can choose from, and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses and perks and abilities, and I always liked how different they all were from each other. I was usually Sam B though, I won't lie. And this also plays into the RPG elements of the game with like skill trees leveling up, the damage numbers show up and everything, you know, kind of like Borderlands. And you know, the RPG aspects are pretty basic in Dead Island. They've never tried to be anything more than basic, but it's serviceable enough. It's really the melee combat is a majority of the gameplay. And the melee combat, you know, it hasn't aged as gracefully as I'd like, but I'd still say it's functional. I wouldn't say it's, you know, great or anywhere near as good as, say, Dying Light 1's, but it's functional, it's serviceable. You know, I didn't realize this until I tried it recently again, but you run out of stamina pretty fast in this game, I noticed, and you'll just kind of be standing there sometimes, hoping the zombies don't attack you as you wait for your stamina to come back. But once it comes back, then you'll be swinging away with your weapon again. The game does have firearms towards the very end of the game. I remember it was like kind of a big deal. It was like there's no guns until the very end of the game, and the gunplay was pretty bad. Like, it just wasn't really tight, or it didn't feel nice, and it wasn't satisfying at all. But you barely ever have guns in this game. Most of the game, you really are exploring this open world, finding stuff, looting, crafting, building, leveling up, just destroying zombies with your melee weapons. Weapons break, you gotta repair them, you gotta go save people, you gotta go collect things, do things for the guy on the radio, and you're just smashing heads with zombies. And generally, I think it's a pretty decent time. There's a decent number of different zombie types in this game, but it's nothing out of the ordinary. If you've played Left 4 Dead or Dead Rising or any of those, you know what to expect with all of these. It's nothing too special, but I think the general gameplay loop is fine enough. I wouldn't say that the game is all that exciting sometimes, especially near the beginning. I remember thinking back then, and even nowadays, that the beginning of the game can be a little boring, I won't lie, and I think that the game is best enjoyed in co-op. When I played it way back when, I played through the whole game in co-op and we had a pretty good time, but coming back all these years later in the beginning of the game, it's a bit slow at the beginning and it definitely takes a while to pick up. I remember when the game came out, it was also incredibly buggy. It had a lot of glitches, it would crash, it had a lot of graphical issues, and there were some exploits you can do in this game that were actually like game breaking, and I'm pretty sure they're still in the game, like how you could duplicate items in co-op. I'm sure the game breaking glitches are still there, and graphically, yeah, it's not very good, and it looks like everything was smeared in Vaseline. Even for 2011, it was nothing special, and I remember the frame rate on 360 was pretty bad. I mean, it's fine on the computer and the PS4 version now, but those original versions could get really rough. But all in all, I wouldn't say Dead Island was a bad game. I wouldn't say it was a very good game either. I would say it was pretty mid. Like, it was alright, but nothing more than that. It wasn't anything all that special. And compared to the trailers that preceded it, yeah, it was a bit disappointing. And so here we have Dead Island Riptide releasing in 2013. Riptide really is a continuation of the original Dead Island and is much more of like a standalone expansion rather than a full-blown sequel. Now, Riptide takes place right after the original and sees all of our characters ending up on a new island and them having to try to get the hell out of there. The story is just as basic and really just as uneventful as the first game's was, and if you played through the first game, you know what to expect with this one. And really, I could say the same for the gameplay. The gameplay is very similar to the first Dead Island. The game graphically looks almost exactly the same as the first Dead Island. This game came out like almost 2 years later, so yeah, it didn't exactly look great. Frame rate was fine enough though, but the gameplay is very similar to the first Dead Island. You're on a new island, and there's new quests to do, new weapons to find, new zombies to kill. But the general gameplay loop really is the same as the first one. You explore this giant world, you're looting, you're leveling up, you're putting in skill points, you're doing quests for characters, you're finding stuff, you're saving people, you're getting into fights with zombies, fights with big zombies, your weapons are breaking. You have to upgrade them, you gotta repair them, you know how all of this goes. If you played the first Dead Island, I think you're gonna enjoy this game. Like, it doesn't do anything all that different. It definitely was a little more polished. It didn't have as many bugs or game-breaking glitches like the first one, but it still had its fair share of issues when it came to glitches and stability. But again, I thought it was better. I thought the pacing of this game was actually quite a bit better than the first one. Like, the game just starts you off with the guns. They're not messing around here. You can have the guns pretty much the whole game, but it's still very melee focused, and I just thought the environment was better designed. Again, the pacing was just a little bit better. I actually didn't play this one in co-op. Like, nobody wanted to play Riptide when it came out, and so I played through the whole game by myself and have tried it again since then. And, you know, yeah, I stand by it. I think the pacing's better. I think the game just kind of gets to the point a little faster than the first one did and really just throws you in there. It really just throws you into the gameplay loop, and I can appreciate that. The game has a decent length to it, around the same length as the first game, maybe a little shorter, and I mean, I didn't think it got really repetitive or boring like the first one could be at times. Now, I remember when this game came out, a lot of people were pretty mad that, like, it really felt almost exactly the same as the first game, and yeah, it does, and it's a fair criticism. The game does not innovate or really improve on anything from the original Dead Island. It's like, it just feels like a standalone expansion. If you're looking for an improvement or innovation on the Dead Island formula, you should try Dying Light, which was Techland's next game, but this game really just feels like more Dead Island, and I mean, I still had fun with it. I still enjoyed it. I would say that I like this game a little more, only a little more than the original Dead Island. And if you like the original Dead Island, I think this is worth a shot. But if you didn't care for the Dead Island, do not play this one. Like, it is so similar. But you can also get that double creature feature that they have on PS4 and Xbox where it comes with both. So, I mean, maybe you'll love both. But either way, Dead Island Riptide, it's alright. And I can't believe I'm saying it, but here we have Dead Island 2 finally releasing after like a decade. Yeah, it's actually here. I remember back in, what was it, like 2014, that initial trailer, thought it would look great then, was like, you know what, more Dead Island sounds good to me, and then we waited. We waited a very long time, but here we are. It's finally here. I really didn't think the game was ever going to come out. I just didn't think it was going to come out, but it's come out, and I'm here to tell you that it's actually pretty alright. I would say it's the best of the Dead Island series. Not that Dead Island exactly had the highest bar, but I would say that this is the best of the Dead Island games. So Dead Island 2 takes place on a bigger island called North America. Okay, no. It takes place in LA and sees your character trying to escape on a plane, but then someone else is affected, and the plane actually gets shot down and you're stuck in Hell A, as they call it. You get it? Hell A, like it's LA, but it's hell. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. Zombies have basically taken over and overrun LA. Like, that's pretty much it. Your character wants to get the hell out of there. You team up with some celebrities and some other characters, including the returning Sam B, but you're just trying to really get out of LA. Like the first game, you get to actually choose what character you want. I believe there's 6 in this game. They all look like rejects from other hero shooters. They all have, as I'll say, interesting personalities, and leave it at that. I will say your character does talk a lot in this game, like to the point where I'm just like, come on now. Do you have to comment on everything like in Forspoken or High on Life? At least High on Life had some laughs. This is just, it does get a little annoying. The story is pretty whatever. The game doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's just pretty upfront with what it's trying to do. Very similar actually to the first Dead Island, and I can appreciate that it doesn't have like any fluff and it just kind of gets right to the point with its story and characters. And I mean, it was fine. I'm not going to act like it's great or even all that good, but it wasn't bad. It was just kind of there, and it didn't really need to do anything other than it does, at least. So it's all about the gameplay then. The gameplay, you know, I am really surprised with this gameplay. Like, it doesn't matter that it's been like 10 plus years since the original Dead Island. This game is so similar to the original Dead Island in so many ways, and it actually comes off incredibly novel because the game low-key feels like a AAA $70 360 game, and I say that as a good thing. Like, the game gets right to the point, it knows what it wants to do, and it just has a lot of elements that you don't really see in modern games anymore that you would see in, you know, 360 era games. And as someone who loves the 360 era, this was great for me. I mostly play modern games, so it was great to see it take some steps back, and it felt like a fun throwback in a lot of ways. A great example is that the game actually is not open world. It is not an open world game. The game actually just has zones, really. It has a couple that, you know, are different parts of LA, and you can explore around, but they're all really bite-sized. There's some side quests in here, but not open world. Speaking of what you'll be doing though, this game is a not open world action RPG where basically, you know, you talk to some characters, you get some quests, you gotta go from point A to B, collect things, and you get into a bunch of fights with zombies. That sounds really similar to the first game, and it is actually. LA is very different though from the first game's island. It's not really an island, it's LA, and I gotta say it's actually pretty decently recreated as someone who's been there plenty of times and lives decently close to it relative to most people. And graphically, I think the game is solid as well. I think it looks pretty alright. I mean, it's not going to blow your socks off, but it looks alright. And I didn't have any performance issues. I actually didn't have any glitches or crashes like at all, which this is probably the most stable Dead Island game of them all, development aside. But yeah, the gameplay loop is actually incredibly similar to the original game, and a lot of it is go get something, bring it back, go save someone, go somewhere, bring it back, or just go somewhere, and then a bunch of zombies show up and you just gotta kill the zombies. In fact, a majority of the time, just a lot of zombies show up and you gotta kill them, and that's the most common objective for sure, is kill all the zombies. Speaking of killing all the zombies, we have the melee combat. Now, the melee combat, it's absolutely improved from the first game and Riptide. It feels a lot better, it's a lot smoother, and there's more things you can do here. Like, the game actually just starts you with a drop kick. You don't gotta unlock it like in Dying Light. You can just start drop kicking fools immediately, and I think the melee combat is actually pretty decent. I'm not gonna say it's great. I'm gonna tell you right now, like, Atomic Heart and Dying Light have better melee combat than this game, but I still think it's alright. I think it's serviceable, it's actually fun, it has some good weight to it, and when you're just throwing around your body, like with these heavy weapons and just smashing zombies left and right, it actually can get pretty fun. I would say the melee combat is decent to good. You do get guns kind of early in this game, like halfway through it you start getting guns, and the gunplay is fine. It's better than the originals, but I wouldn't say it's great or feels all that great or it's all that tight. It's just okay. The game doesn't have a very interesting roster of enemies. It mostly is just regular zombies, or they throw some element in there, or they're wearing like body armor, or there's like a big jacked up one, and that's pretty much it. Towards the end of the game, there's a few different ones that are actually, you know, different from those regular zombies, but for the most part it's just regular zombies you're going around killing, and pretty much they infinitely respawn, so you'll just have plenty of zombies to kill. And you know, your weapons do break like the first game and you got to repair them. There's like this whole kind of crafting mechanic where you can upgrade weapons, you get blueprints, and you got to fix them, and this is all really basic. Like, the crafting is really basic. It might be more basic than even like the first games. Like, you just find stuff all over the world and then you just kind of use it along with money to upgrade and fix stuff, and it never really gets more complicated than that. This game, when it comes to its depth, it's about as much as a puddle, seriously. Like, it has pretty basic melee combat, all things considered, and very basic upgrading and crafting, and it just kind of goes with it. And you know, there's nothing really wrong with that. The game isn't the longest either. Like, it didn't get repetitive for me. I did not play the game in co-op. The whole game is playable in cooperative mode, just like the first game. But for those who are expecting like a really deep experience with a deep level of crafting and skill points and upgrades and customization or anything like that that you kind of low-key expect with modern games, you're not going to get it here. This game is pretty basic in that sense, and you know, it knows what it wants to do. It doesn't try to be anything else. It doesn't try to have some really deep crafting system that's really annoying like Horizon Forbidden West or some Ubisoft looking skill tree. Like, this game, it does have like skill cards and you can like equip different perks depending on which character you are and what you have, but like, it's all really basic stuff, and it's at the most just some little bonuses here and there. A majority of the game really is just beating the shit out of zombies with these weapons. Look, Dead Island 2, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It isn't really innovative in the zombie killing genre, and if you've played plenty of zombie killing games in the past, you'll feel pretty at home here. The game sometimes can feel about as mindless as the zombies, and you can go into autopilot, but you know, sometimes you need a game like that. I'd say Dead Island really is that like ideal 7 out of 10 game. Like, it's actually pretty solid. I had a pretty nice time with it. Would I recommend it at $70, $75? No, I would not. I would say wait for a sale. The game's going to be probably $10 within 6 months, or on Game Pass. It just strikes me as a bargain bin game. I've seen plenty of people already dunking on this game, saying it's boring, that it doesn't do anything interesting, and you could play the whole game on autopilot. And you know, it's not for everybody, but I think a lot of the people that play it, I think most people that play it are going to enjoy the game. I think most people are going to like the fun melee combat, the goofy story, and just the setting of LA. I recommend it when it gets a bit cheaper. Out of all the games, if you're going to play any game from this video, I would say Dead Island 2 is the one to play when it's cheaper, and you might just have a really fun time, get some friends together and just blast away at everything. And that's it for me. We've talked enough Dead Island today, so I hope everyone has a wonderful day. If you made it to this part of the video, comment bricks as in what you used to build a house. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night.